You know, it's shocking how many people think there have only ever been 3 Elder Scrolls games released, which is crazy to me since they're all numbered, but I digress. Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. I won't deny, they're all fantastic games, at least from what I remember of them. But what about Arena and Daggerfall? Now, Daggerfall has gotten a lot of love and attention lately, thanks to the Unity version, but that still leaves Arena in the dark. With the next entry of the Elder Scrolls franchise somewhere on the horizon, I wanted to stop and revisit all of the games. I want to look back and see how far we've come, what we've learned, and sadly what we've lost. But in order to do that, I need to start right back at the beginning of the franchise, with Bethesda's 1994 release of the Elder Scrolls Arena. Oh, and just a quick side note, this video will contain spoilers for the entire story, so you've been warned. It all begins with Emperor Uriel Septim VII summoning his battle mage, Jaeger Thorn, to the royal court. The Emperor has been hearing rumors of treason, and wants to confront Jaeger Thorn about these rumors. These rumors are indeed confirmed true when Thorn turns on the Emperor, and using his magic, traps the Emperor in another dimension. With the Emperor now trapped, Thorn puts his plan into action. He begins to transform his appearance into that of the Emperor. His goal is simple: impersonate the Emperor and rule over all of Tamriel. However, a wrench is thrown into these plans when his apprentice, Rhea Silmaine, had witnessed the entire event unfold. She tries to flee and warn the Elder Council of Thorn's treachery, but is sadly struck down and killed. Meanwhile, our hero is locked in a dungeon until one night, the spirit of Rhea Silmaine appears. She tells us that she has chosen us for an important mission, and that we must find the only weapon strong enough to stop Thorn: the Staff of Chaos. Sadly, the staff is broken into 8 pieces, and we need to travel across all of Tamriel to find those pieces, reassemble the staff, and stop Thorn once and for all. Now, things get a little tricky here. See, that was the rough story of Arena. To talk more about it, it goes into gameplay, as both the main story and the main story dungeons are one and the same. So, from this point onwards, we're going into gameplay and spoilers, so be prepared. Arena isn't an overly complex game to play. The gameplay is essentially broken up into 2 parts. Like most RPGs, you'll find yourself doing the main story and side quests. So let's talk about that main quest. As I mentioned earlier in the story section, you're tasked with tracking down 8 staff pieces to the Staff of Chaos. In order to do that, we have to travel to 16 dungeons, with 2 extra dungeons added on, the tutorial sewer level dungeon and the final dungeon. Most of these dungeons are either a hit or a miss, so let's just go over them as quick as I can. After the character creation, which I'll come back to later, we find ourselves in the dungeons, which are located in some underground sewers. The first mission is to escape the cell. This whole dungeon will act as a sort of tutorial for us, the player. You'll learn that keys can open doors, enemies can drop loot, you'll learn how to pick up that loot and equip it, resting in places can bring possible danger, and, well, there's a lot you can learn. However, that said, the game will not hold your hand. If you didn't pick up and read the manual, you're going to be in for a bit of a trip. Arena is brutal. This dungeon is here to prove that point to you. You're going to die over and over again. The sheer level of brutality is to prepare you for the outside world and the dangers that it brings. This dungeon is here to mostly make you test a character's build, if that's something you're into. You won't have to go far before learning if the character just isn't cut out for this world. The old fortress was dark and in ruins. Long gone were its glory days, overrun with a whole host of enemies that I had to deal with to get what I came here for. The rats and the goblins shouldn't pose much of an issue for any player who has reached this point. The new enemies, however, might be a bit of a problem. In particular, the minotaurs and ghouls. These guys hit hard and play harder. They do not mess around, and you'll most likely need to level up a few times before taking them on. The biggest problem in Stonekeep, however, is the spiders. These aren't your normal itsy bitsy spiders. These guys will ruin your day really quick if you're unprepared. At times, I swore they were stronger than a minotaur, but that might have just been my imagination. The real threat is the paralysis. They can lock you into place and just beat you to death with all 8 legs. You need to have a spell or a potion that cures paralysis to deal with them, or be a high elf. Hell, even in the late game, these little bastards would surprise me and cause my death. They will never stop being annoying. It took a while to search this once proud fortress, but I did come across a really sweet magical weapon. I had no idea what it was at the time, but this weapon let me cast powerful fireballs pretty much just non-stop. It was so handy, I kept it with me the entire game, and it got me out of a lot of tight situations. Personally, I enjoyed Stonekeep, and it was a good follow-up to the sewer dungeons, adding on to what you already learned there. I did oddly find myself immersed in Stonekeep. I really felt like I was travelling through a once proud fortress, now dark and long dead. Stonekeep wasn't a bad place at all. Spiders aside, that is. Bloody spiders. Fang Lair was once home to the dwarves, a castle built upon the rocks. We'll never know what they did there, but that's a question for another day. Right now, we are sadly not here to explore the castle itself, but the mine shafts below. I didn't have too much trouble with the enemies of Fang Lair, aside from the bloody spiders, that is. But in the depths of the mines, I did end up remembering that I had a light spell, which came in very handy, but I'll talk more about that later. Actually, Fang Lair makes me want to talk about a few new things introduced. These new things are a splash screen and riddle doors, but I'll talk about those more in depth later. For right now, we just pick up the first piece to the Staff of Chaos. Honestly, this was a really proud moment for me. I'd been playing the game for at least a few hours at this point, and picking up that first staff piece was just... it felt good, it felt rewarding. Honestly, I loved Fang Lair. It was a solid first staff piece dungeon. The fortress was cold, and I wasn't dressed for the weather. Chainmail isn't the best material to keep you warm, although that aside, the fortress's emerald floors and icy walls were a sight to behold. What wasn't a sight to behold were the new enemies within its icy walls. The new enemies did give me a bit of a run for my money, that's for sure. The warrior could take a beating and dish it out. The snow wolf shot projectile ice balls at me, which could kill you very quickly. There was also the ice golem, but thankfully, due to my sword or fireball, I was able to deal with them really quick. If the last dungeon wasn't enough to test your character build, this dungeon will be. From this point onwards, the game won't throw anything more at you. Enemies will get stronger, that's a given, but at this point you should have all the knowledge you need to succeed. This was one of the longest dungeons for me personally. I ended up walking around and around, going up and down, well over for 2 hours looking for the next staff piece. This dungeon was a true test of patience, at least for me. I'll be honest here, Labyrinthian really does live up to its namesake. Is it a good dungeon? It's okay. There is a slight story here about 2 brothers seeking the secret of life and failing, forever being doomed to hold part of the key to unlocking that secret. It's pretty interesting stuff, but it really doesn't do anything with it, which is a shame because I would have loved to see more done with it. After completing this dungeon, you should now have 2 of 8 staff pieces you'll need to defeat Jaeger Thorn. Remember when I said this game doesn't hold your hand? everything you need is in the manual? Remember when I told you the game won't throw anything more at you? Right, so we need to talk about this dungeon, and I have to go on a little bit of a rant, so I apologize in advance. RTFM was a term used in a response to somebody who was asking a dumb question, I was doing air quotes there, about a game that they were playing. How do I do X? What is Y? RTFM stood for Read the Fucking Manual. Everything you should need to know about the game you were playing was in the manual. Today's games tend not to have manuals, at least the physical kind. Pretty much everything you need to know is in a guided tutorial where all the buttons you should need to know in the game are shown to you. Do you go through a standard stealth section, do a C button or whatever to crouch, here's the jump button over an obviously jumpable area, stuff like that. But back in the day, there was none of that. You actually had to sit down and read the manual, or at least have it next to you from time to time. Why am I bringing all this up? Well, it's because I should have read the manual, or at least a little bit more closely than I first did. I searched the entire dungeon, top to bottom, 3 separate times. I was actually getting angry because I couldn't figure out what the hell I was meant to even do or look for. A way up? A way down? A button to press maybe? Maybe the item I was looking for was just behind a secret wall and I didn't notice that secret wall. I was so convinced I had screwed something up or that the game had bugged out that I actually reloaded a save and did the entire dungeon for a 4th time. But I was wrong. So very, very wrong. See, in the dungeon, there was this place called the training area. Inside the training area was some sort of shelter, maybe? Anyway, when you get close to the shelter, a message will appear on screen. There is a little dust here, and the footprints that exist are those of humanoids running towards this wall and jumping. Well, when I first read that, I figured, oh, I have to jump here. But nothing happened. I figured maybe I was wrong. But I wasn't. Maybe pass wall, I thought. Nope. I had spent longer in this dungeon than I did in Labyrinthian. And I cracked. I went online to look up what the hell I was supposed to be doing, and it turns out I did need to jump. A running, sliding jump. At no point in the game up to this point has that mechanic ever been used or even talked about. Now, had I read the manual, I would have noticed the buttons for a running jump. I could have died. As soon as I pressed the keys on my keyboard, the character did like a weird sliding jump and over the wall he went, and there was the item I needed to complete the dungeon. So, how was the dungeon aside from that? Yeah, it was fine. It was, well, aside from the bloody spiders, of course. Fucking bloody spiders. But let's move on, okay? Let's just move on. I've never really been a fan of mazes. Not the real-life kind, anyway. But I think if I went into a real-life maze and it was covered with fog so thick that I couldn't see very far ahead, I would totally hate mazes. Well, Elden Grove had me covered, and now I hate mazes. You'll be walking around trying to find landmarks only to be attacked by a ghost who is blending so well into the fog you barely see him. It took me a solid 30 minutes before I even found the entrance to the dungeon. But when I did, I thought my troubles would be over. I was so very wrong about that. The actual dungeon to Elden Grove is pretty much your standard dungeon, only this time there's a lot of water, and I really mean there's a lot of it. The dungeon had a few cheap kills, but more or less, it was fine. I was able to get my hands on the third staff piece and continue onwards. This dungeon, honestly, it wasn't so bad. Aside from a haunted door, a cheap death, some bloody spiders, and a game crash, when all was said and done, I'd only spent about 40 minutes inside looking for what I needed to finish the dungeon. I actually started to think to myself as I was backtracking out, oh, maybe my luck has changed. Maybe the fourth staff piece will be as good as mine. We gotta have a talk again, as I have a confession to make. Pass wall. That's my confession. Let me explain. The halls of Colossus were grand indeed, built as a place for the giants. However, the giants were long gone. This once great place has now become infested with lizard men and rats. Well, actually, a lot of rats. As I made my way through the halls, I would eventually come to a flight of stairs, leading me deeper within this place. As I descended down the cobblestone stairs, I soon found myself in the dungeon's namesake, the Halls of Colossus. I mean, this place was huge. The pillars lined the walls on each side, and what felt like 1,000,000 rats scampering around just biting my ankles were there. But at the end of this grand hall was a huge locked iron door. Now, I knew I needed specifically an iron key to open the door. What I didn't know was that this wasn't the only key I would need. On my journey to find the iron key, I would come across a ruby key and a sapphire key, but no iron key. I returned to the door with a bit of a cheeky idea. I wondered if I could cast Pass Wall, a spell that lets you remove a single wall from the dungeon, and just walk past the door. Since I couldn't find the iron key, I thought, I might as well give it a shot. I cast the spell and the wall vanished, but behind that door was another door. As it would turn out, there was a grand total of 7 keys for 7 doors. I cast Pass Wall to bypass each of these doors in order to reach the 4th staff piece. I felt ashamed of my actions in this dungeon. I'm sorry, Bethesda. I hope you'll be able to forgive me, but let's move on, baby. After battling my way through some ass-kicking monks, wolves, and wraiths, I came across the treasure room, or at least what I think is the treasure room. Inside was a note telling the other monks to clear out the room and move the things, that's more air quotes, to a secure storage area in the northeast side before any meddlers arrived. So, I made my way to the northeast and found the item I came here to look for. The temple was actually a pretty simple place with no real problems. But, well, I mean, it did have I did encounter one bug, but that was entirely my own fault. Other than that, I honestly have nothing much to say about this dungeon, so it's onwards and upwards. The Crystal Tower. I won't lie, I actually loved the description for this. For some reason it makes me think of something Lovecraftian. Here, let me read it for you. The Crystal Tower dominates the area, rising like an accusatory finger pointing at the sky above. This bastion of sorcery seemingly transcends normal human conceptions, existing in many other places than this. I was so pumped for this dungeon, and honestly, the dungeon itself was pretty enjoyable. There was a bunch of cells inside filled with tons of different monsters. While it didn't say anything, I still got the feeling that they were being experimented on, and that really got my imagination going. There was one tiny problem with this dungeon. In order to unlock a cell door and progress up, you needed to find a map to the key, which in turn would unlock that cell door. That map is engraved on an enemy's back. When you click on the enemy, a message, the map, will appear and then vanish. I actually paused the game and wrote the message down, but when I unpaused to double check I wrote everything down correctly, the message itself vanished. Now, thankfully I was able to get the key, but the problem is, you can't ever get that message again. If you missed it, you might get screwed over in this dungeon. But aside from that, the dungeon again was pretty enjoyable. So I took the 5th staff piece and continued on. Wow, talk about a change of pace. I rather enjoyed the Mines of Kurus, at least from an aesthetic point of view. The lava on the walls makes it feel kind of dangerous. I also rather enjoyed the lava traps, which makes this dungeon a little bit harder than the others. Up until this point, most dungeons had either water or a drop down area, but they never actually hurt you. It was just a slight inconvenience. The lava, on the other hand, does hurt you and does slow you down if you do drop into it. Sure, you can walk around it, but there are some passages that are blocked by the lava, which forces you to find another way around. Or you could use the levitate spell. So far, the mines have been my favorite dungeon. It was straightforward and easy enough to finish, so on to the next dungeon. The Crypt of Hearts dungeon was almost like a gauntlet of challenges in a way. The level felt more like it was set up to test your skills, which was almost backed up by the sheer amount of enemies inside. I mean, you'll be fighting ghouls, skeletons, ghosts, hellhounds, homunculuses, stone and iron golems, wraiths, spiders, and even a fire demon for fun. Oh, I mean, it really felt like it was meant to try to break you down, which is funny because I'm pretty sure I never actually died in the dungeon at all. However, that said, I could totally see this dungeon being a massive problem for a strict fighter or thief type, especially if you didn't have the right enchanted items. There were times I'd walk into a huge open room and some ghost or hellhound would just launch 5 fireballs my way. I have the reflect spell, which protects me from something like that, but if you didn't, you'd just die really quickly. Aside from all of that, there was a cool mural in the crypt, which I hadn't actually seen at all up until this point, so that was pretty cool to see. But it really wasn't much to write home about, so I grabbed the next staff piece and continued on. This dungeon was, well, it was really forgettable. So forgettable, in fact, and easy enough for me to deal with the dungeon that I actually forgot to take notes, so I guess just moving on. Time for the 7th staff piece. Remember Elden Grove? Well, picture that, but spread way out, and no real landmarks to help guide you on your way. This wasn't fun at all. In fact, the very opposite. I spent over 40 minutes just looking for the entrance to the actual dungeon. But when I did find the entrance, the staff piece was like right inside, like genuinely right in front of you. That, oddly enough, makes it the easiest and shortest of all the staff piece dungeons. I mean, outside was annoying, but still. With the 7th piece of the staff in hand, it was time to get moving along. I know I've been kinda rushing through these last few dungeons, but the truth is, honestly, nothing in them stood out or was worth talking about. And it's sadly the same with Blackgate. The monsters inside are stronger than the last dungeons, that's for sure, but much like Mirkwood, I finished the entire thing in 40 minutes. Blackgate was really forgettable, at least for me. So, let's move on to the final staff dungeon. Dagoth wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought, since it was the location of the last staff piece, that it would be long, tough, and filled with powerful enemies. You know, put my skills to the test. But it wasn't. I mean, not really. Sure, there were indeed powerful enemies. In fact, the 3 most powerful in ascending order. The Medusa, vampire, and the newest to appear, the Lich. But maybe it was luck or more than likely my magic, but I never did die. In fact, I got through the whole thing rather quickly, all things considered. The only thing that slowed me down was I needed 5 keys to open 5 doors. I'm sure I could have just pass-walled my way through, but after the last time, I didn't want to. After that, however, I was able to get the final staff piece and complete the Staff of Chaos. There was one problem. The staff was completely useless. Jaeger Thorn himself tells us that the staff has no power, and it's nothing more than just a fancy stick. He taunts us, telling us that it's now time to face him, one-on-one, and that he'll be waiting in the Imperial Palace. Now it's time to talk about the palace. It's honestly, it's bullshit. The whole place is filled with enemies pretty much at every single turn, and I truly struggle to fathom how any class that can't cast magic would survive this bullshit. I cannot stress it enough. Enemies will just appear behind you without warning, start slinging fireballs at your way, and you'll be dead before you even know what's happening. That is the entire palace. But below, it's worse. Remember how I told you about the Lich? How it's the most powerful enemy in the game? Get ready to fight like 3 of them at a single time. Those things are crawling in the dungeons below. After fighting my way through never-ending liches, I came to a heavy steel door. Behind the door was a room filled with lava, and of course, liches on platforms shooting lightning bolts at me. Past the lava is the big man himself, the head honcho, the big kahuna, whatever you want to call him, El Jefe, Jaeger Thorn. This guy does not mess around. He will silence you, toss fireballs at you, and poison you. It doesn't matter if you're at range or not. Up close and personal, he's deadly. At range, deadly. It can be a tough fight, and I myself died a few times. But after a few solid hits, he eventually shields himself within a bubble. He's totally immune to all damage at this point, and you have to figure out a way to kill him. Inside the room is a jewel of some sort. You walk up to it, touch it, and Jaeger Thorn dies. The Emperor is freed, and you are named the Eternal Champion. And that's it. That's the main story and the dungeons itself for Arena. There aren't any other characters in the game you'll learn things from or anything like that. You aren't slowly unraveling a plot as you continue. It really is just the world's in trouble, get magic item, and beat the bad guy. You aren't learning more about Thorn's backstory or anything like that. That's why I found it a little tricky to separate the story and the gameplay. The story really is just told to you in a little cutscene at the beginning and right at the end. That's it. There is nothing else. But with the main story out of the way, we can move on to the side quests and other gameplay elements. Let's start with side questing. I was about 5 hours into my game, and up until this point, I was doing just the main story quests exclusively. I thought it was best to stop and take a break. I was in need of some new gear and experience, so I thought, why not take a side quest? And how do I find the side questing? Well, honestly, rather pointless. The rewards I got for the effort I put in was low, and I really do mean low. A side quest in this game falls into 3 types: go to place and get item, go to place and kill an enemy, or just escort somebody to their destination. That's it. The people, locations, items, and the dungeons are all random. And the side questing can go on forever. That's the nature of being procedurally generated. I never had fun with any of the side quests. I never felt engaged, and worse, like I said before, it just wasn't worth the effort, not even in the slightest. I actually ended up going back to main story dungeons just to grab loot and kill enemies. I got more experience and more items that way. Each of the side quests are also timed, so if somebody says to you, go to X and get Y before the end of the week, they really do mean it. So you have to factor in time travel, and time travel. Yeah, all right. Get in the DeLorean, go 88 miles per hour, Doc. Good job. Oh, man. Time travel. What I actually meant was you need to factor in travel time. So the time it takes you to get there and the time it takes you to get back is all actually calculated. If you don't make it back in time, the side quest fails. So I just didn't like doing them. But that was just the random side quests. What about the special side quests? These special side quests are called artifact quests, and they are one of a kind, each with its own special reward. There are 16 in total, and you can only get these quests randomly when speaking to people in towns or cities. When you walk up to somebody and ask them about a rumor, they may mention hearing about an item from a person in a random town. If you follow up with this lead, you'll be rewarded with a unique quest, the Artifact Quest. Completing the quest will get you the artifact. Now, it should be noted that you can only ever have one of these items. In my playthrough, I was able to track down arguably the most powerful of these artifacts, the Ogma Infinium. That item will grant you up to 50 skill points upon pickup. That's a lot, considering when you level up, you only get about 3 to 5 of these. So 50 at once pretty much turns you into some sort of demigod. These artifact quests were the only real highlight in the side questing department. Aside from the main quest, side quests, and the artifact quest, there isn't much more to say about the content of this game, because there isn't really anything else. You don't get companions, make relationships, buy houses, horses, or anything like that. Arena really is just very simplistic, which isn't a bad thing at all. But now is the perfect time to talk about some other things I didn't mention before. The riddle doors. You see, in the main quest, you get these sort of special doors that can only be opened when you answer a riddle. These riddles can range from very easy to very hard, damn near bordering on the impossible. I won't spoil any of these riddles for you because even though I did kind of give away the entire game, if you still play it, I want you to discover something for yourself. However, there was one riddle we have to talk about. And I won't explain the riddle or give away the answer, but just know that it was by far the most insane riddle I have ever come across in my entire life. There was only 5 riddles that I personally needed help with, but out of those 5, 2 of them I actually had to look up the answer. I did my best to play Arena like it would have been played back in 1994. No internet, just asking friends or family for help. But this one riddle, this one particular one, was just so mind-boggling. Nobody I asked could figure out the answer, so I had to look it up. There was no way in hell I would have ever gotten it. But overall, like I said, they range from easy to hard, and for the most part, I really enjoyed them. Now, this is admittedly something I should have spoken about earlier. It's the character creation section. But better late than never, I suppose. When it comes to creating your character, you can either choose between taking a little quiz or just pick from a pre-made list. The quiz can be fun, but I honestly went with picking from the list. The character creation part is just pretty standard stuff as far as RPGs go. You know, you pick your name, gender, looks, race, stats. But the race and the gender can actually make a difference to your stats. I'm personally not the best when it comes to min-maxing. I usually just pick characters and stats I think I'm going to use and I think I'm going to like, and if it doesn't work, I just sort of roll with the punches. But honestly, while the game does punish weaker characters, you can push through and get stronger. You must suffer to get better. Now, race can actually make a bit of a difference. Each comes with its own unique ability. For example, the High Elf. The High Elf's ability is very, very handy. It's total immunity to being paralyzed, which I can say after playing the game will be handy, but it's not 100% required. If you have a spell or potions, you'll be fine. Somewhat connected to racial abilities is class. Each class has its ups and downs. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I picked the Spell Sword class. I like to use magic from a distance, but weapons up close. I always feel like it's just a nice balance in games. However, the class you pick really can come in handy. It can really make you or break you. The Spell Sword can use magic, something like a warrior cannot use magic. And magic is extremely powerful in this game. If you can't cast magic,
you're gonna have a bad time.
For example, the Light Spell. The Light Spell can make dungeons brighter, so you can see further away. While this might not seem all that handy at first, trust me, it is. If an enemy spawns outside of your visual radius, and you can't see him, and he just starts slinging fireballs your way, you'll be dead before you even know where it came from or what the hell hit you. Now, how would you deal with ranged attacks? Well, that's where the Reflect spell comes in handy. You can send those same fireballs right back at your enemy, and trust me when I say this spell will not only save your life countless times, but make the game so much easier. Spells are powerful, and you should very much keep that in mind. There were so many times I'd honestly wonder how a thief or a warrior might make it through some of the dungeons, but hey, if you want to roll that way, that's up to you. Up next is travel in the game. The travel system in this game is done almost exclusively through fast traveling. You want to travel to another town or stronghold? Fast travel. Main dungeons? Fast travel. Side quest dungeon? Fast travel. It's all fast travel. Real time passes, as I mentioned earlier, so you have to factor in that time travel. the travel time. I almost screwed it up for real again that time. You have to factor in the travel time. So, remember that because it's important. This whole world, main dungeons excluded of course, is procedurally generated. So you could walk outside of town and travel around on foot, but you won't be making it to the nearest city or town anytime soon. It does feel real in that respect. If you were to walk outside of your home right now and travel on foot to your closest neighboring city or town, it might take a while. So the fast travel never bothered me that much. I actually liked it. Now, I need to talk about a few other things, such as the bugs. In my playthrough, I encountered quite a few, ranging from something as simple as a game crashing all the way up to quest-breaking glitches. I did look into these bugs for this script, and it turns out they're both common enough to have their own place on the wiki. The garbled quest location bug and the quest success unrecognized bug. Both seem to be fixed by a restart, which is good, but for the quest success bug in particular, I was actually forced to reload and redo one whole quest from the start. You must always, and I cannot stress this enough, you must always save your game a lot, and in many different save slots. This helped me many times, but sadly, if a bug did happen, I would lose a little bit of progress. Arena is an older game, and bugs in Bethesda games today are a running joke, but it seems like it's always kind of been a bit of a problem, so you've been warned. Lastly, I want to talk about the splash screens. I love these works of art, and of course, that amazing snippet of lore they provide for us. They allow my imagination to just run wild with all sorts of ideas, so I began to yearn for more of them. I would love to see a novelization of all the Elder Scrolls games. I think that would be just fantastic. I don't know how it could be done, but it would be fantastic. Actually, that reminds me, going slightly off topic here, but not really, there is a short story inside the player's guide. It depicts the introduction to the game, and this, along with these little location blurbs, really made me want more. I love them. I really do. My only regret is that there isn't one for each of the main dungeons, just the ones that house a staff piece. This was my first time ever playing Arena. And like I said at the very beginning, Arena isn't a complex game. The story and the extra gameplay content is bare bones, but that doesn't make Arena a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. Arena is, if anything, an amazing look back on the past history of Bethesda games, in particular the Elder Scrolls games, just to see how far we've come. Should you play Arena? Well, that's up to you. The game is dated, to be sure. The controls and difficulty might take some getting used to, but if you really want to see where it all began, then I think it's worth checking out. The game is free on both Steam and GOG. All it's going to cost you is time. I personally clocked in a grand total of 55 hours on GOG for this review, and I honestly enjoyed my time with it. And honestly, that's it. I don't have anything more to add to this. It's really a bare bones game, and anything more would just be me rambling. So I think it's best to just wrap it up, because up next is the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall. What will the sequel bring? Well, there's only one way to find out. Peace out, pals.